I'm going to take you through my entire process of decorating. We're going to talk about how I approach and plan out my decorating. I'm going to give you specific tips and tricks for things like pathing and trees and fencing. I'll be answering some of your questions about decorating and more. Hello my loves, and welcome to this very special video, which is my ultimate Disney Dreamlight Valley decorating guide. Let's talk about the different ways that you can get inspiration for decorating a space. What I like to do when I approach decorating is figuring out what is the vibe or the aesthetic or the theme that I want to have for a specific place. I think that having a certain vibe or aesthetic picked out ahead of time can be really helpful when you're decorating a space. It helps you pick out the items that you want to use. It helps you figure out what kind of pathing you might want to use or how many trees you might want to use in a certain space. I have also occasionally picked out certain items and then based an entire area's aesthetic around that. This is just an example and I don't have a lot to show here, but the Haunted Mansion premium skin pretty much single-handedly decided what the vibe of my Glade of Trust was going to be. Because of this item, I decided that I want my Glade of Trust to kind of be almost like an abandoned swamp, because the Haunted Mansion to me kind of looks like a creepy abandoned house. And so I was like, okay, so let me take that vibe, that aesthetic, and let me apply it to the entire Glade of Trust. So to sum up, when you're getting started, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to decide on a vibe or a theme, or you can use a certain item to help inform what you want the aesthetic to be. Keep in mind, there's no rules here. When you're thinking of aesthetics or vibes, I don't want that to be overwhelming or limiting. I just find that when I sort of decide on a theme ahead of time, it helps me to make a more cohesive design, but you can always break from that. In terms of looking for specific inspiration, once you have decided what you want your look to be, there's a lot of different options that you can go for. So there are obviously a lot of Disney Dreamlight creators that are making amazing builds, whether that's on YouTube or Twitter, etc. Pinterest is going to be another really great way to get inspiration if you've decided on a certain aesthetic for your build. So for example, you could go into Pinterest and type cottagecore aesthetic, and you'll be able to browse these images that fit into that look. That will help you kind of visualize the look of the certain aesthetic that you may be trying to achieve. Now, it is going to be a little bit of a challenge to try to incorporate these specific looks using the items that we have in Disney Dreamlight Valley and like the limitations that we have of the decorating system. There's definitely things that you can incorporate. So for example, this image right here, we have a bicycle and there is the bicycle item. So maybe that tells you, let me try to incorporate that bicycle in some way. We also see this very natural pathway right here, and we see trees coming over the pathway. These are all things that you can definitely achieve in Disney Dreamlight Valley. I like this example as well. Here's some lily pads. So lily pads are definitely an item that are in Disney Dreamlight Valley. As another example, I've put in city park aesthetic into Pinterest. So this image right here of Bryant Park, we have the buildings in the background. So maybe you can incorporate some of the taller buildings that we have, like Chez Remy, Remy's apartment. There is a bordered sort of cement pathway. So maybe you could incorporate the bordered brick pathway, perhaps. They also have these florals here in the middle, which we do have a couple of items in Disney Dreamlight Valley that are similar to that. Here's another example that I really like that I think is definitely something that can be easily incorporated into Disney Dreamlight Valley. There are the trees that are coming over right here and the hedges kind of along the fencing right here. I definitely think this is something that is pretty easy actually to bring into Disney Dreamlight Valley. Another good way to find inspiration is to take inspiration directly from Disney films. So for example, in this build here, I was heavily inspired by the aesthetics of The Lion King. I think it's a little bit challenging to try to fit the aesthetics of one film into an entire biome, but it's definitely doable. And it's also a really good way to approach certain houses. So for example, you could make a Encanto themed build around Mirabelle's house. Okay, so you have your aesthetic and your style for your build in mind. Now, how do we actually put that down in the game? I'm going to use this blank area of my Forest of Valor. I used to have my Forest of Valor theme park here, which I do actually have a speed build up of if you want to go check that out, but I got rid of it because I'm going to give this space primarily to Belle and the Beast. I just haven't gotten around to decorating it yet because I'm waiting to finish Belle and Beast quests first, but for our purposes, it actually works out really great because it serves as a really good example place to use. The way that I always approach things is I pinpoint the exact items that I know I'm going to want to use in a build. Specifically, I think it's a good idea to incorporate the large items that you know you're going to want to use. So in this example, we'll put Beast's Castle right here. And let's also put the palace, the regular palace house skin right here. Okay. These are the only two big items that I know I'm going to want to use here. Next thing that we're going to be doing is laying out the pathing. I'm going to talk more in detail about pathing in just a minute, but for now, I'm just going to say that the pathing style that I'm going to be picking is this natural brick road without the borders. So then you just kind of want to lay out the path where your pathing is going to go. And you can always go through and change details of this later, but I think it really helps to go ahead and add in your pathing where you know you're going to need pathing. So just filling this in really quickly. And there we have our main path laid out. So obviously you can go in and tweak this later on, but just notice how less overwhelming it already feels because now we don't have this huge, massive biome. Instead, we have little areas. We have this area right here. We have this area right here. And we have this area right here, this area right here. So it really divides it up into these different spaces so that you can kind of approach those one at a time. So actually one thing that we do want to be mindful of when we're placing our large items, and I kind of forgot this was here for a second, is that we want to make sure that all of our pathways are clear. So this little bridge right here is obviously something that I'm going to want to keep clear. So I'm going to put this castle here, but I am going to inch it up just a little bit because I do want to still be able to come around the back of the house, because I'll talk about this more in just a minute, but we want to make sure that we're keeping all of our areas accessible, like the river for fishing spots. I'm going to move this pathway sort of in just a little bit just to kind of give us more space. So now I have my two main large items that I know I'm going to want to have in the biome. So the next step in the process for me would be to probably build up the areas around the major items first, and then I would fill in the rest of the area with some of the more smaller areas that I would have. So I'll start with a little courtyard for the palace. This is just going to be a real quick throwing stuff together here. And actually, as I'm doing this, see, this is just an example if it's always okay to be moving your pathing and stuff. As I'm doing this, I'm realizing that I think the path is a little bit close to this. So I'm going to actually have it kind of come down more straight on this side and over here so I can give more space to that palace. Okay, so there's just a really quick courtyard that I put together. In reality, I would probably want to make this area a little bit bigger if I could, but that just kind of gives you an idea of what we have going on. So now I've sort of built up the main area of the palace. Then I would probably go on and work on the main area of the Beast Castle. And then after that, I might go and fill in some of the smaller spaces. So you can kind of decide what other sort of spaces you might want to have. Do you want a sitting area? Do you want a picnic area? Do you want kind of a like a farmer's market or a shopping area? that would have Goofy stall or maybe some other stalls. And again, if you're trying to hold to a certain aesthetic or a certain theme, you're going to want to kind of go back to those to sort of inform some of the things that you might want to be incorporating. So for example, a farmer's market in a cottagecore or rustic area, a nice park area with fountains and hedges and stuff. If you're doing a city park theme, you get the idea. One thing I want to call your attention to and encourage you to be mindful of is making sure that your builds stay functional. So you still want to be able to access resources and things that you're going to need to actually play the game. So it's not a good idea to block off things like mining nodes or a fishing spot, because then it's going to be a pain. If you need to access those, you're going to have to actually tear down bits of your build to get to those. So as an example, it would not probably be a good idea for me to put a bunch of flower bushes along the edge here. I mean, it does look cute. I'm not gonna lie. I like the way that it looks, but if we come back down here, if I wanted to get to that fishing spot over there, I can't really get to it at all. Maybe I could come around if I hadn't put more bushes over here. I could kind of come around on this side and get to it this way, but if I put more bushes here, I wouldn't be able to get to them at all. Another big one is mining nodes, so you're going to want to make sure that you keep your mining nodes nice and clear. I have my Forest of Valor that is really built up over here. To get to this mining node, I've pretty much kept everything empty. And coming around to this mining node, okay, well, except that this is here right now, but we'll get rid of that. But this mining node right here, I've also kept a little pathway clear so that it is easy for me to get to this mining node. All right, now let's get into all things pathing, because the pathing that you use and the way that you approach pathing can be a complete game changer for the look of your decorated areas. So when it comes to pathing, for all of the different paths that you have, there are bordered and unbordered versions. So using a bordered version is going to give you a much more polished look. And we'll look at that with a few examples with my favorite pathing. Here's the leaf strewn path. We'll take a look at the muddy path as well. And we'll take a look at the natural rock path. So the same two paths with and without borders are going to have drastically different feels to them. I like to use the unbordered paths when I'm trying to go for a more natural or rustic look, or if I want something to feel a little bit overgrown, whereas a bordered path is obviously going to be in a much more like developed, well-kept, structured area. I think a really good example of that I put into practice is on my beach. So I have two sides to my beach. You'll see on this side of the beach, I imagined this as a much more built up area, more of like a boardwalk sort of vibe, whereas over on this side, it is much more natural and a little bit more overgrown and wild. Across the entire beach, I've used the natural rock path, but on this side, I use the one with the border to give off the feel of a much more structured, well-maintained area, versus on this side, I have used the raw path and put rocks and bushes and stuff around it to give off the feel of a more overgrown, natural area. Now I want to give you a couple pathing tips specifically for the non-bordered versions of the pathing. One of the things that is often lamented is the fact that there's really no way to make them curved. And so we have these really harsh corners, which doesn't look very natural at all. But there are a couple of things that you can do to kind of soften those edges or make things feel a little bit more natural and generally more visually interesting, which is to add things like underbrush and rocks along the edges of the paths. Okay, I've pulled out a couple of items here to use as an example. You can strategically place them around certain corners to make them appear more natural. For example, we can put the fern right here. It will go right down on top of the path. And now this doesn't look as harsh. We're not seeing this harsh corner right here because it is covered up by the fern. We can also put rocks around the edges to give the illusion of a curve. I also just sometimes like to put these rocks right here around the edges. They don't necessarily hide the harsh edges, but by covering them up even just a little bit, it makes them stand out a little bit less, I think, and it is quite visually interesting to have these rocks coming off of the main path, in my opinion. You can put bushes around the edges as well, and I quite like getting these round flower bushes right here and then putting rocks really kind of close up into them. I think that looks really nice. And there you have it. I think this is a great option to do with pathways to make them look natural, overgrown, to make the edges appear a little bit softer, and to overall just make it a little bit more interesting to walk along. Some examples of that I have in my valley is this leaf-strewn path that leads you over into the campsite. So notice I have the rocks along the path right here, the ferns, the bushes, etc. I also want to talk about how you can completely create the illusion of a round path using bushes and rocks. This is something that I have in my Forest of Valor with this path right here, as well as this circular fountain area as you enter my Forest of Valor. But let me show you how I achieve that. This is a little bit tedious because you're going to have to take out lots of rocks. So what I would do first is I would make the design with the rocks. We're going to make it curve around this way. So one thing that I'm doing is I'm rotating the rocks. By rotating the rocks, I think that it gives it more of a natural look, although I have seen builds where they've kept all the rocks facing the same direction, and I think it looks really good as well. So it's just really up to your personal preference on that one. All right, and now that we have the outline of the path, what we're going to do next is we're going to take the whatever pathing that you want to use, and we're going to fill it in. So if you were to take this off, this path would look real funky, but because the rocks cover up the edges, it looks almost curved. Now this is where you're probably going to want to tweak some things, because depending on how the pathing lays and the rocks lay out, you might have some kind of weird edges like this. So this is where I would then go in and just sort of adjust things a little bit to try to cover up as much of these edges as I can. And now we have the illusion of a curved path. And then when you take all the rocks off, you can see how funky the path looks underneath. But by covering it up with rocks, it doesn't look near that jagged or uneven. You can also do this with bushes. So we'll take some of these flower bushes and put them along the edge as well. And there you have it. Another nice curvy pathway, but actually not. The next and last thing that I'm going to touch on with pathing is how you can use some of the bordered pathing in creative ways. So my favorite thing to do with the muddy path with border is to use it as sort of a flower bed. So you can put it along anywhere really that you would want to have a flower bed. I'm just going to attach it to this little courtyard that we've made right here. And then you can put underbrush on there. So something like that, you can create a really nice little flower bed sort of looks. I've actually put a few of those around in my valley. One of them is my plaza, where I have put this flower bed right here. And then I also have one in progress in my glade of trust along the corner of this fenced in yard area. Another really cool one is the leaf strewn path with border. I think this one also looks a lot like a flower bed, so you could definitely use this one as a flower bed as well. I think it looks really good when you have a lot of the more like rustic cottagecore or farming stuff on there. You can kind of put those things out, and it adds just a lot of personality and visual interest to a small little area like that. Okay, now I want to go into a little bit more detail about how I approach using trees and underbrush. there are different sizes and shapes of all the trees. We'll just look at this tall maple right here as an example. So if I take out the tall maple, and then let me take out another one. Okay, so notice how this one is a different shape. And then there's also this little smaller one right here. And one of my favorite trees to use is the short Japanese maple. If it fits your aesthetic, this is a very, very powerful tree to have. And the reason is because there is one of these versions that only takes up 1 square. So all of the items that you use are going to have these green squares around them. So this one has 4. It's a 2x2 square. You can't put anything next to it that would fit into one of those squares. So you can't overlap squares anywhere. Now, one of the short Japanese maples only takes 1 square. Here it is. This one right here. This is the king of all the trees because it is so easy to fit it into these small areas. If you're just trying to pack an area with trees, like I am often doing, this is going to be such a game changer for you. I'm going to put this right here. See how I can just nicely scooch it into that hay bale? And now that looks so cute to have a tree just kind of like tucked right there in between the hay bale. I love it. Perfect tree. One of the things that you're probably going to want to do pretty often, especially if you're building a more natural build, is filling in spaces with natural items and underbrush. Using my beach as an example, I have a lot of areas where I just have them filled up with trees and rocks and bushes and things like that. So I want to show you how I approach filling in empty spaces with underbrush, and we're going to do a little section of the Forest of Valor as an example. Let's say I had a little pathway going this way, and I have just an empty space right here, and I don't really have anything specific that I want to do with it, but I know I want to make this a natural space. So I'm going to fill in that area with some of my favorite natural elements. Now, I think that the natural elements that you use depends on what biome you're in and or what aesthetic or what vibe that you have going for it. Now, thankfully, Disney Dreamlight Valley has, in a lot of situations, already told us which one of these rocks or bushes or whatever is going to kind of more naturally fit into the color scheme. And for the most part, I stick to that. But sometimes I do use different ones just depending on the look that I'm going for. So in this specific example, I'm going to be using the Forest of Valor color items along with the Peaceful Meadow color items. They're a darker and a lighter shade of green, and I think that having more than one shade of green is going to make it look a lot more visually interesting than just having one shade of green. So I'm going to do trees first. Okay, so now I have my trees. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in with my bushes. One thing that I really like to do is I like to layer the dwarf birches with the flower bush. So I'm gonna take this Forest of Valor flower bush and I'm going to set it around this way. In order to create a nice layered look, I always want to sort of offset things a little bit. So as much as possible for my personal style, I usually try to avoid just making straight lines of items. Instead, I like to offset them a little bit to make them look, in my opinion, more natural and more visually interesting. So there we have our bushes. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in other elements. For example, one thing that I really like are the ferns. I think the ferns can look really good. I also really like this meadow grass item and the beach grass item. So those are going to have two very different looks. So the beach grass item is going to be this tall, light colored grass, and then the meadow grass is this short purple grass. So you can just kind of decide which one matches the look that you're going for. Another good item to add is, of course, rocks. So I'm just going to kind of put some of these small rocks just randomly out around. And again, I'm trying to keep things kind of offset. So I'm rotating things around. I'm tucking them behind other things just to kind of make it look very, very natural. Another tip that I have is to utilize the large clusters of things if as much as possible. So these are really good for filling in large spaces. They can be found in the rocks category as well as some in the trees category. I'm going to go ahead and take out this mossy Forest of Valor rock with mushrooms. And this is such a cute little item, and I will set it. It's kind of hard to find a good place to set it. So maybe I'll just put that one right there. And then there's this large one, this mossy rock and trunk. If I just needed to fill in a really large space, I could put it right there as well. So there you go. That's how I would approach it if I was going to fill in a space with a lot of natural items and try to keep it looking as natural as possible. All right, let's talk fencing, because the fencing that you choose for an area can make a really huge difference on the look and feel of a build. There's obviously no rules on which fencing you should use for different builds. I think your best bet is always going to be to try different fences in different areas and see for yourself how it changes the look and feel of your build. I will say that for me, I tend to like the white picket fence for a more quaint, rustic, cottagecore vibe. I like this dark brown fence a lot for a more foresty, natural vibe. The brick and iron fence is probably my number one favorite fence. I like this one for very polished city vibes. This is one that I utilize quite a bit in my park inspired plaza. But the beautiful thing about this is that you can always just try things out for yourself and see how you like them. I do have one little tip, which is something that I love to do with my fencing that I'm going to share with you all. If I'm ever going to be needing a large square of fencing such as this, one thing that I love to do to make things a little bit more visually interesting is to either break up the fencing with natural items or create little indentations in the fencing that I can kind of scooch things into. So let's look at a couple of examples of that. First of all, let me get rid of some of this fencing. Okay, so that looks even. Now what I would do in order to make this a little bit more visually interesting is maybe put some natural elements in here. For this example, I'm going to put some flower bushes. So notice how it really already kind of breaks that up visually and makes things look a little bit more interesting. Another thing that you could do is possibly make the corners be indented. So we can pull this out, go like this, go like this, go like this. And that looks a little bit more visually interesting as well. You could even maybe put a small item or something in here. It doesn't really fit the aesthetic that I would normally go for in the forest, but with this small indented space and the Japanese maple that only takes one, you could just fit a tree in there so nicely and it looks so cute. Another example of adding an indentation to make things look more visually interesting would be if I actually just created a small little indentation and brought this in like this. Now you have this cute little carved out area and you have a lot of different options for the things that you can put there. So for one of the things that I love to put in a space like this would be a bench. Now I'm looking at this and realizing that the shape is not quite right. So I would actually probably bring this like this, bring this like this, so that it fits in there just right. Or you could make the indented space be even larger so that you could fit other items in there, like for example, a plant or some pumpkins, just whatever works for your space. Another cute thing you could do would be to fit in a flower rectangle in that area. I think that looks so nice. My next tip for you all is to use crafted items or cooked items as decor. Certain materials, crafted items, and food that aren't found in the furniture mode do have a specific way that they have to be put into the world. So the way to do that would be to, whatever item it is, you're going to want to split it into a group of one. So I'm going to split this soil into one. So I'm going to use this soil and I'm going to use this rope. So I'm going to drop the rope. And then I'm going to drop the soil. And now when you go into furniture mode, you'll be able to pick up those items and move them around wherever you want. Let me show you a few examples of how I've used those in my own decorating. I like to put the rope items out along beachy or nautical areas. I also put out some fish that I caught and a shell to create this fish market area. Over here, I have placed some sand piles around to make things look a little bit more natural and worn down. In my Pirate Cove area, I placed some gems that I mined to look like a pirate's treasure. Over at my cottage house, I placed some soil on the table over here to make it look like leftover soil after potting plants. And in my outdoor dining area, I placed a cheese platter that I cooked on this table to look like a lovely cheese platter that some folks are about to enjoy. Now I would love to answer some questions that you all gave to me on my community post. There was a lovely question: how do you balance between expecting what is needed for tasks versus what to keep to use for decoration? For my own personal decorating, I don't very often use things that I expect will be needed for quests. Most of what I use is pathing, furniture, or the natural items. So anything that spawns whenever I have the time to go through and clean up is something that I would probably clean up and then put into my storage. I will never be able to make a video that Maui doesn't interrupt. I swear. We're moving. As I was saying, in general, I think a really good rule of thumb for deciding how much you want to keep of something is to, at the very least, keep about 5 to 10 of certain items for tasks or quests as I need them. I do not track the spawn counter personally. I just kind of let things spawn as they do. Another really good question that I had is, my issue is leaving space for new builds for Dreamsnaps because I always want to decorate the whole biome. Now that is a really interesting question. I have been able to make it work by building in biomes that I haven't decorated yet, or just making something that I have already decorated work for the prompt. But this is definitely something that I'm gonna have to think about going forward as we get more and more Dreamsnaps prompts. I think a really good way to handle this would be to leave a space in your biome, either undecorated or decorated in such a way that you don't really care if you tear it down. So you can have one like flexible area in your biome that you can tear down and decorate per your needs for Dreamsnaps as you go. Or you can always just tweak builds that you've already done. Another question that I really liked, I really struggled to get started in general actually a lot of times with pathing. I feel super overwhelmed and not sure how or where to get started. So I kind of addressed this a little bit when I talked about planning out the biome, but I would say the best thing to do is, number one, decide what are the big items that you're going to put in a biome or in a section of a biome. Houses, premium houses, lay those out first. Then you're going to want to figure out basically where your paths need to go. So you're probably going to need at least one major path going from the entrance to the exit. So I would just lay all of those out and just kind of map out where you want your paths to be before you even start really putting any decor down. And then, like I said, of course, you can go in and you can tweak the paths as you need, as you're looking at them from different angles, or you're adding in different things. Literally. He just follows me. It's like he knows when I'm recording and he just follows me. He just stares at me while he's dancing. Like, is this supposed to be for me? Because I'm good. Thank you, though. Anyways, so yeah, just break it down. Big items first. Where do you want them to go? What areas do you need to connect? Lay out the path, and then you can tweak it as you go. I have some last closing thoughts for you all, which is just have fun. It's good to experiment. Don't be intimidated by a space. Just break it down into small chunks. Try different things, try different styles, see what you like. Don't be afraid to tear stuff down. Lord knows I have done entire builds, hated them, torn them down, and then it was like perfect the next time. So don't be afraid to do that. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you're liked and subscribed. You can follow me on Twitch, where I stream Disney Dreamlight Valley, and I do a lot of decorating on stream. And usually when I'm decorating on stream, I'm going through and I'm really talking through everything I'm doing. So if you want to see more like hands-on decorating content, that would be a good way to find it. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Do something cozy today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.